Hanchon Sean presents A Little History of Religion, based on the book by Richard Holloway. Based on this book. So hey guys, that was the last Paper Sean episode of A Little History of Religion. From now on, well, at least for 10 episodes, I will be doing it in the regular Sean mode, which is kind of easier. So I'll be announcing for the next few series of A Little History, we'll be doing it this way. 10 episodes of Paper Sean, 10 episodes of regular Sean, and then, I don't know, maybe 10 episodes of Dark Sean or something. But who cares? I'll just do this. So, chapter 11. This chapter is called The End! And as I've announced in the previous episode of A Little History of Religion, we're going to stop talking about Jewish people for a while, and we're going to start talking about Christians. So back to the video. Bad things can happen to good people, as the book says. I just quoted the book, by the way. And the last book in the Christian Bible divided the bad things into 4 main parts. And whom we call the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. War, famine, disease, and death. Those 4 have galloped through history since the beginning of time, and they show no signs of stopping. Stop! If you don't believe in a God, like me, or in other words, if you think you're an atheist, if you don't believe there is a final meaning to existence, unless, you make a meaning for it, I'm not really sure how this works, then suffering is just an unpleasant reality that you hate to deal with, but you have to. Ow. Ow, that's harder than I thought. But if you believe in a God, which, unlike me, but my parents used to be, theists, then you'd think that this was all an eternal punishment. And there has to be a reason for it. Why does the God permit so much suffering in the world? And why is it good for the sufferers to suffer? In this chapter, we'll keep on thinking about how the Israelites as a people rather than one individual in particular. I did say we're going to talk about Israelites, and I think I may have reached that part alright. If you're going to be talking about Christians, you will always have to talk about Israelites, because that's where Christianity is from. Back to the video. The one true God who had called Israel to be the chosen race, his bride... Wait, what? His beloved. So why does this have to be a costly relationship? Mula. Well then, because of a lot of things of complications. The prophet Ezekiel, who we've covered in the previous episode, told them it was because they had failed to understand their past. That being God's special people meant separating themselves from the ways of the other nations and their gods. Instead, they copied their ways. They mixed them up with each other. And that was kind of a bad thing to deal with. And they even treated the one and true God as if he was an idol who just wanted to be flattered and sacrifices made for, and not as if he wanted justice and holiness. Roman Israel again established themselves as a nation for whom the religious purity would be the purpose and the only reason why this one and true and only God chose Israel for the first place. The true question I'd really like to ask is, why did God even choose these guys? Why can't they just move on? Well, because this is God, we just made it up. I hope no one heard that. No Israelites heard that. But studying religion, you have to believe this. So, hear me out here. Their peace had been destroyed by the Antiochs, and their suffering started all over again. But there was a difference. Now it was the faithfulness to God that had made it all up. The God that was causing their misery, so the old explanation for their suffering as a punishment no longer worked. So a new explanation was needed. I mean, their faithfulness to God was the thing that's causing their misery. So, punishment for doing the wrong thing doesn't make any sense now. What's the new explanation then? Well, the only thing is that Antiochus gave another element to the Jewish tradition. There has been a lot of things happening too. It introduced an element of Judaism that's to have consequences for it in its own history, but also for the history of Christianity and Islam where they came along. I mean, Christianity and Islam is like babies of Judaism. I mean, Jesus was Jewish in the beginning. We have already seen that the prophets of Israel's main history show them the future as much as we hoped, but they did do a part of it. Instead, they told forth God's anger and Israel's past instead. So what's the catch-up here, guys? The first apocalyptic agent himself called himself Daniel, and he put his message in a short book that only the Jewish readers could understand. He said it in the Babylon and during those years when they were in exile in there, but it was actually a coded message that only the Jews could understand. The book itself had 6 stories and a few dreams, and most famous of the older stories was the David and Goliath story, when it was meant to assure that the Jews that they would survive the fury of their persecutor. Well, according to this story, Daniel, one of the Jews exiled in Babylon, was an official for the Persian Empire, and he was, admired by the son of Cyrus, King Darius. Darius? That sounds like my friend Marius, even if you can't call him a friend. Anyways, that's what he was, and he was the one who eventually let the Jews return to Judea, and that's pretty much all. And so the other officials were kind of jealous, and they decided to put Daniel in a trap. They made this law, and they convinced King Darius to pass this law that said no one is allowed to, worship any other god except Darius's. And was like, sure, and just passed that law without thinking about it because he got so many flattered. And then they reported Daniel's worshipping of the Jewish God. And then he reported it to the king. The king was like, how did this happen? But he gave his word. He had to throw Daniel into a den of lions. But then Daniel was thrown into a den of lions. And when he emerged the night next, he was still alive, unhurt. Well, the Jewish readers knew that this was not meant that if they kept wallowing in their own God, that God would save them. Instead, it just gave them hope that God would eventually do save them. Not in the way like throwing you in a trap and then save you from getting into by lions saving, but sure, saving away from Babylon and getting allowed to go away. This was supposed to reinforce the resistance. I'm not sure if this story was true though, but if it was, it's a horrible one. But Daniel also just wanted to comfort Israel in its time of suffering. I mean, Pompey and the high priest of the Holy of Holies expecting to gaze on Israel's God, and there was a lot of things too. According to a legend, when the great Roman general Pompey went into the room where the gods were supposed to be there and found nothing. The symbol for the Jewish God was nothing. Alright, I don't want to sound like the Joker or that Riddler guy from Batman, but all I want to say is that Pompey was kind of furious and kind of surprised that the symbol for the Jews was that there's nothing there. And then eventually the Roman Empire was like, I will finish Jerusalem, and decided to flatten the Jerusalem temple and decided to destroy it forever. And then there's Titus, the general who led this attack, said, there, I finished the Jews. They're never going to come back, are they? How wrong he was. They were far from destroyed. The Jews did lost everything that they loved, except one thing, the most important thing of all, their God. Ooh, somehow they still have it inside. I'm still surprised that the Jews aren't extinct yet. They're like on all different sides of the globe. They were also very suspicious of those who thought that they could contain their gods in words. That God was a word, that he could be represented like that word, he could be represented by that word, he could be represented by that drawing, and stuff. And then heretics started appearing on the screen. But what are heretics? Heretics are those people who are very uncomfortable with other people and ask lots of major questions to the majority that challenge their thinking. And one of the most heretics that we're going to meet was from the smack middle of the Jewish Bible itself. So, I'll see you guys in the next episode. Shout out. Peace.